The bread was already in the oven when I heard him come down the stairs. I didn't turn around. I stood at the counter with my hands flat against the wood, and I listened. His footsteps. The weight of them. The pause at the bottom step. I was calculating the way you do when you've had 12 years of practice, whether this was a quiet morning or a careful one. Outside, the fields were white. The wood stove ticked. The kitchen smelled like warmth. It looked like peace. I knew the difference. My name is Rebecca, and this is Amish Life Unspoken, a space for the stories our communities didn't have words for. If this is the first time you've found me, please subscribe. And I want to ask you something in the comments. Have you ever mistaken silence for safety? I'll be reading. It was a Tuesday in February, the winter I turned 31. I remember the light, flat and pale, the way it gets in Lancaster when the sky has been gray for so many weeks that you stop expecting anything different. The wood stove in the corner pushed heat into one side of the kitchen and left the other cold. I was making bread, shaping the loaves the way my mother had taught me, pressing the heels of my hands into the dough. Everything in that kitchen looked right. The order of it, the plain curtains, the swept floor, the table already set for breakfast. From the outside, I imagine it was the picture of a faithful life. I had believed that once too. What the picture didn't show was how carefully I had arranged myself inside it. Every morning began with the same quiet arithmetic. What mood was he carrying? How much space did he need? What version of myself would move through this day without creating friction? I didn't think of it as fear then. I wouldn't have known to call it that. I thought of it as attentiveness. I thought I was being a good wife. The Ordnung shaped everything in our community, what we wore, what we drove, what we allowed ourselves to want. And somewhere inside all that shaping, I had learned that my first task each day was to read the room before I entered it. The house itself held the structure the way old wood holds weather. The table had an order to it, where he sat, where I sat, where the children would eventually sit. The windows were bare because curtains were considered unnecessary decoration, and unnecessary things had no place in a plain life. I had no opinion about the windows. Or, rather, I had stopped offering opinions about things that had already been decided. Not because I was told to be silent, but because I had learned, early and quietly, that my opinions tended to arrive at the wrong moment, in the wrong tone, and required correction. After a while, I simply stopped forming them out loud. We were taught a word for this. Gelassenheit. Yielding. The letting go of self in service of God and community. It was a beautiful word when I first learned it. It carried something I genuinely wanted, a stillness, a belonging, a sense that my smallness was holy. I believed in it. I still think I understand what it was meant to be. But somewhere in those 12 years, what I was practicing stopped feeling like surrender to something sacred. It started feeling like disappearance. Like I was being asked not to yield my will to God's, but to yield my voice to one man's. And that man believed sincerely that those were the same thing. The first time something felt wrong, I was 20 years old, and we had been married for months. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no raised voice, no door slammed, nothing that would have looked like anything to anyone watching. We were at a frolic, a community work gathering, and I said something to one of the other women. Something small. An opinion about planting, I think, or the timing of a project.
He didn't respond then.
But on the way home, in the buggy, with the dark fields moving past us and the horse's breath clouding in the cold air, he told me, gently and with complete certainty, that I had spoken out of turn, that it wasn't my place. I sat with that. I turned it over. And I decided he was probably right. The Ordnung governed what we could see, the dress, the technology, the worship. But there was another set of rules underneath it, unwritten, that governed the things you couldn't see. Who spoke first at the table? Who made decisions about the farm, the finances, the children's schooling? What a wife's hesitation meant versus what a husband's silence meant. I am not saying every Amish home worked this way. I know women in my community who had something different, something more equal in the quiet of their own houses. But in mine, the invisible rules were very clear, and they had the weight of God behind them. That weight is hard to describe to someone who hasn't felt it. For years, I thought the problem was me. That was the simplest explanation, and in many ways the most available one. I prayed more. I read the Osbund, and looked for something I was missing. I tried to want less recognition, less conversation, less room to be a full person inside my own home. I thought Gelassenheit was a practice I hadn't yet perfected. I thought if I could just learn to be quieter, smaller, more yielded, the tightness in my chest would ease. Instead, the tighter I made myself, the heavier everything became. But I kept trying. Because the alternative, that something was genuinely wrong, was a thought I didn't have the language for yet. There was a woman in our district, a few years older than me. I'll call her Miriam. I watched her the way you watch someone who is walking a path just ahead of you in the dark, not to follow exactly, but to see where the ground holds. She was quiet in the same way I was quiet. Careful in the same way. Her husband was well regarded. Mine was too. We never spoke about it directly. You didn't, in our world, put words around the things that lived inside a marriage. But I watched her at Sunday gatherings, the way she angled herself before she spoke, the half-second pause before she moved. And something in me recognized it. I didn't know yet what I was recognizing. That would take longer. There was one specific night, that I couldn't explain away. I've been carrying it for a long time. I'll tell you what happened. But first, I need you to understand what 12 years of small moments actually feels like to live inside. It was a November night. The children were in bed. The house had gone that particular quiet that old farmhouses get in winter, the kind where you can hear the walls settle, where every small sound travels. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a mending basket in front of me, and he was across the room, not angry, not loud, simply telling me something that had been decided. A decision about our oldest son, where he would apprentice. For how long? It had been arranged. He was informing me the way you inform someone of the weather, not unkind, not cruel, simply certain. And I opened my mouth, and then I closed it. And somewhere in that small, silent closing, something shifted in me that I have never been able to shift back. I heard myself in that moment, the way you sometimes hear yourself from a distance. I heard the sound I didn't make, the words that formed and then dissolved before they reached air. And I realized, not dramatically, not with any kind of clarity I could have named that night, that this was not the first time, that I had been closing my mouth for 12 years. That the careful arithmetic of every morning, the reading of the room, the arranging of myself into the shape that caused the least friction, none of it was attentiveness. None of it was Gelassenheit. It was something else. Something I had been too faithful, too frightened, too deeply inside to see. The hardest part was the language, or the absence of it. In the world I came from, we did not have a word for what I was living. The English word, the one I eventually found years later, felt too large, too clinical, too loud for what my life actually looked like. My life looked quiet. My life looked ordered. My husband had never once raised his hand to me. He was present, he was hardworking, he was faithful by every measure our community held. And yet, I was afraid in my own kitchen. I was afraid in my own bed. I was afraid in the half-second before I spoke, every single day. There was no Amish word for that particular fear. So for a long time, I decided it wasn't real. I reached toward one person, an older woman, someone I trusted, someone I believed would understand. I chose my words carefully. I told her that I sometimes felt, and I remember pausing for a long time before that word, unseen. She was quiet for a moment. Then she told me that marriage was a place where we learned to die to ourselves. That the discomfort I felt was probably God working something loose in me. That I should pray and submit and trust that the Lord saw what my husband couldn't. She meant it kindly. I know she did. She loved me the way she knew how to love me. And still, I walked home feeling more alone than I had before I asked. Both of those things were true at once, and learning to hold them both took me a long time. Miriam and I only spoke of it once. It was after a Sunday meeting, standing near the fence line at the edge of the yard while the men talked and the children ran. She looked at me, just looked for a moment longer than usual, and said, very quietly, I know. That was all. 2 words. We didn't elaborate. We didn't cry. We stood there in the pale November light, and we let those 2 words be everything they were. I have thought about that moment many times since. How much weight 2 words can carry when they're the first ones that have ever fit. We both knew. We had both been knowing for years. We just hadn't been permitted, by the community, by our faith, by ourselves, to say it any louder than a whisper. Leaving is not a single moment. I want to say that clearly because I think the outside world imagines it as a door. You walk through and you're out. But Meidung doesn't work like that. Shunning is not just something that happens to you. It is something you watch coming, the way you watch a winter front move across flat fields, slowly, completely, with nowhere to hide. I knew what leaving would cost. My mother's eyes at the table. My sisters turning their faces. The children confused by a world that had suddenly drawn a line through the middle of their lives. I am not telling you it was easy. I am not telling you I have no grief about it. I left pieces of myself in that community that I will not get back. That is also true. What I understand now, and couldn't then, is that my husband was not the architect of what happened to us. He was as formed by the system as I was. He had been taught that a man's certainty was a form of love, that a woman's yielding was a form of faith. He believed he was being a good husband. He believed, I think genuinely, that the structure we lived inside was holy. He was not a cruel man. He was an obedient one. And that, in the end, was exactly the problem. The same obedience that I had been asked to give, blind, complete, unquestioning, had been asked of him too, toward a structure that no one was permitted to examine. We were both trapped. I just ran out of room first. I don't know what my faith looks like now. I am still finding out. Some mornings it looks like something I recognize, and some mornings it looks like nothing I was ever taught. But I know, with the kind of knowing that lives in the body, not the mind, that faith was never meant to feel like the sound of a mouth closing. It was never meant to feel like 12 years of careful arithmetic before breakfast. If you are somewhere right now where peace and fear have started to look the same, where silence has become the only safe language, I am not here to tell you what to do. I would never do that. I only want to ask you once, very quietly, is it peace? Or have you just learned to be very still inside it? My name is Rebecca, and I finally know the difference